I'm about to drop a podcast on you, wholesome people. Welcome to the daniflopodcast. It's good to be with you. I'm going to do my best to sit up straight, and I'm going to do my best to hold the microphone close to my mouth. I have tried clipping it to the collar of my t-shirt. It doesn't sound bad or anything like that. I just think it looks kind of funny. Maybe it would look less funny if I wore a polo or a button-up shirt. I think I've clipped it to like the collar of my hoodie as well, and it still looks, in my opinion, equally as funny or like out of context because then it just kind of just like hangs and it kind of pulls the t-shirt a little down. But also, I'm going to try and sit up straight. I think I naturally like slouch, I think is the word. And I'm actually using a notebook because I wrote some things down. I won't leave you in suspense. I'm going to share those things with you. So I'll try not to look down. I think when I look down, I might like slouch. And then what I got to do is bring myself back up. Also, if you're listening on the audio only podcast, you can't see my new beard stash. What is a beard stash? Fun fact about me that you know if you have watched the podcast video is I have a patchy beard. What that means is it's pretty full around the chin and even on the side of my jaw and underneath my jaw. This portion of face between my chin and my neck, it's pretty full down there, which I think I get from my dad's side of the family or my dad's genes. But my cheeks are patchy. And actually my sideburns are pretty full. So sideburns, jawline, chin, part of face between chin and neck, and even actually top third of neck, pretty full, which I think I get from my dad's gene. And then cheeks are patchy. I think I get that from my mom's side of the family or her genes because my uncles on my mom's side of the family, no disrespect to them, I've never seen them. Maybe they can grow their cheeks, but I've actually never seen any of them with hair on their cheeks. They have nice stashes. Mine's actually starting to come in. For a long time, I had not a good stash, but the stash and the patchy cheeks, I think I get from my mom's side of the family. My mom's side of the family, my uncles on my mom's side of the family, they either have a mustache or mustache and some version of a goatee. So yeah, but last year around this time, actually around my son's 4th birthday, I promise that it was thoughtless, I thoughtlessly grew out my beard longer than usual. I just wasn't trimming it down, and it started to look fuller than what it normally does. So once I noticed that I had thoughtlessly let it get to a certain length, I kept growing it a little bit more. And then I actually went to a barber and got it kind of like lined up, shaped up, and I liked how it looked. And then so from about June of last year until recently, so for about a year, I didn't grow my beard for a year, but for about a year, I let the fuller parts of my beard grow longer to where it actually looked more of like a beard. But the problem is that I start to fidget with my beard and I like start pulling on it, right? When it gets to a certain length. And so I'll be sitting on the couch, on my phone, or even on the laptop, or reading a book, and I will be pulling on my beard, and then I get like little hairs all over my shirt from pulling on my beard. So I started to get on my own nerves, and I started to annoy myself. So I wanted to see what a beard stash looked like. Now, if you're wondering how I know the term beard stash, like I said, I've been letting my beard grow a little bit longer than usual, and like I've gone to barbers a handful of times, no more than like 3-4 times in the last year. But what I've been doing to kind of maintain my own beard is that, sorry, I was checking to see if the mic was still on. By checking this little green light. But anyway, is I've been watching beard videos on YouTube, and I learned the term beard stash. So what a beard stash is a longer mustache and a shorter trimmed beard. So I did this about a week ago. I don't think that it looks bad. My sister did say that my mustache looks more of like a Mexican uncle mustache, aka my mom's brothers, the ones that I was telling you about that have nice mustaches but no cheek hair and or just a goatee. My son did say that I look weird, and he did say that he wanted me to grow my beard back. So I think I am going to grow my beard back, but I just had the temptation to try this look. My wife doesn't think it looks bad. She just thinks that it looks different. Maybe that's code for it looks bad. Anyway, I personally think it doesn't look bad. I think it looks good. I don't think it looks as good as when I have the longer beard. So anyway, I told that story because when I began, I said that I was going to try and keep the mic close to my mouth, and I also wanted to say I'm going to try and keep it close to my beard stash. Anyways, so the purpose of my podcast recently has been to provoke thought. I try not to hide who I am. I would consider myself somewhat of a Jesus freak, and maybe that's why the podcast hasn't done as well as it could potentially do. I think maybe it has just more to do with my inconsistency of it, and how I'm not like plugging it 24/7. Although I have mentioned this before, I have a Facebook page, a Facebook. I don't think it's a Facebook page. I think it's just a Facebook for the podcast. The only person following me there is my wife. Shout out to you, baby. I am going to put it, check the link tree, because I'm putting it in the link tree. And then I also have a dedicated Instagram page. So I have those two things. And then of course the podcast is everywhere on Spotify. And excuse me, I burped, and on YouTube. So I think it has more to do with that. But when I first became a Jesus freak, it felt like I was late to the party. It felt like I had discovered something, and I still think that I have discovered something really valuable. So you kind of just always want to talk about it. You'll kind of just find a way to bring it up with people, and I've moved away from that. Not because I still have that desire to do that, but I've kind of realized that it's not the best way to try and introduce people to the person of Christ, because if I think about it, that's not really what happened with me. But the reason that I bring that up is because I personally think that people don't come to know God. I don't want to say "and" because Jesus is God. If I'm talking about Jesus, I'm talking about God. But then if I'm talking about God, I'm also talking about the Trinity. But anyways, let's just, for the sake of this intimate conversation, let's just use the word God. I personally think that people don't come to have a relationship with God or come to believe in God because someone hasn't provoked them to think more deeply or to get out of the thinking pattern that they're already in, right? And so I kind of want to indirectly put people on the path where they may come to believe in God and ultimately have a relationship with Him. And so I think sometimes, the episodes have been overtly like that, and then I think sometimes they've been more on the subtle side. So I guess this one is more overtly because I'm mentioning that is in fact what I'm doing. But I wrote down some things that I think we all experience pretty early in life because we live in a pretty liberal and libertine society. What that means is that like there's less stigma and things are thought of less as I think the word is called taboo than they were before. So like now you can pretty much do anything you want, and maybe people in your family or even your friends don't agree with it, but you can pretty much find anybody that will agree with your actions and even defend your actions. So we live in a time where we can pretty much do whatever we want, and there's less judgment than ever. If you don't agree, you can go ahead and comment below and tell me why you don't agree. But I pretty much think that if you get judged for anything, it's kind of like you get judged for kind of agreeing with or thinking in a way that is considered old school thinking or traditional thinking, or oh, that's how people used to think, but now that we're in this century or in this year or in this time or in this era or in this whatever, that way of thinking is outdated. So that's enough banter. These are in no particular order, but so I think there's a certain amount of drugs that you can take and people are relatively fine with it. And people will take drugs for different reasons. But I think the most common reason that people take drugs is because it's pleasurable, right? It does something to the body that makes you feel pleasure. And it could be drugs that traditionally have been illegal and then more recently have been legalized, like marijuana. It could be drugs that are considered hard drugs, but it could also be pharmaceutical drugs and prescription drugs, right? So the reason, like I said, the major reason that we do that is because there's pleasure associated with it. And it doesn't take extreme amounts of money to be able to get your hands on drugs. A person with a regular job that works a 9 to 5, even a person that has a family and has other people responsible for them, if they want to get drugs, they can get drugs. And a lot of times, in the past, I would say people were less inclined to do drugs because there was a stigma with it. But now the rationale is, oh, as long as they're not hurting anybody, if a family man is out doing drugs, as long as he's still fulfilling his obligations at home and he's not hurting anybody else, let him do the drugs or whatever. But that's not the point. The point is the why. And like I said, all of these things have to do with we could say human pleasure or just bodily pleasure. The reason that we do it is because it has a form of pleasure attached to it. And the reason we become addicted to drugs is because it produces that pleasure that we felt either the first time that we did the drugs or that we continue doing the drugs. So that's the first thing that I want to bring up about bodily pleasure, right? The second thing is, like I said, no particular order. The other thing is eating, right? Eating, we have to eat a certain amount of calories to survive, but anything above that, we're doing why? For pleasure. It feels good. It tastes good. Um, Sometimes we enjoy the sensation of eating. Like for me, I drink sparkling water because it kind of creates uh almost like the carbonation in the sparkling water creates a sensation that it feels like it's burning my esophagus on the way down. We might like the pleasure of a full stomach or whatever it may be. Um, just like drugs, eating can become an addiction because of the pleasure that we seek and that we enjoy having when we're doing the thing, whether it's drugs or eating. The other thing is alcohol. There's a pleasure that comes with, like when people get tipsy. I've been tipsy before, that it comes with a certain amount of pleasure. Now, sometimes being drunk can be pleasurable in the moment, but sometimes it causes a bad hangover. And but that's what I mean. We know that there's a negative consequences to getting drunk, the hangover the next day, or sometimes you do and say things that you wouldn't normally do when you're sober. And yet the pleasure that we get from being tipsy and or drunk, we like it so much that we're willing to put ourselves in that situation again, whether it's doing or saying something that we might not say sober, or having another hangover, right? Like there's something about that pleasure that we get that we're willing to take the risk. The next one is sex. And so yeah, I mean, I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. Like, I mean, for anyone who's ever had sex before, and I think that one is easy to get. I mean, all of them are easy. I think all of them are easy to get addicted to because, like I said, I think we live in a liberal and libertine society. But we live in a time where like you're still judged for engaging in too much sex, but we live in a time where casual sex is okay, whereas opposed to before it wasn't. And then, at least culturally. And then also we live in a time where hookup culture is a thing. I mean, back in the day, I mean, I don't know how they did things back in the day because I wasn't born back in the day. I was born in 92. So all I know is from 92 forward. But I mean, we have an app called Tinder that is, I don't know if the original purpose was just to find people who are willing to take the risk and hook up with each other, even though they're strangers. But I mean, more or less, that's what it's used, or so I've heard, because I've never had a Tinder account. Facebook, yes. Twitter, yes. YouTube, yes. Snapchat, yes. Reddit, yes. But I've never had. I think Tinder came out after I met my wife, but I think sex in this generation is easy to get addicted to because there's no social pressure not to have sex too early anymore. I mean, they hand out condoms and birth control in public schools a lot of the times because the philosophy of today is, well, we know you're going to do it anyway, so we might as well give you the means not to conceive, which is one of the natural consequences of sex. But since you're so young and you're not, this is the philosophy of today, because you're so young and you can't control your urges, we might as well give you this safeguard that will prevent you from becoming a parent too early from the thing that causes parenthood. But the pleasure of sex, like I said, is something that we're willing to risk becoming parents too early in order to get. And I mean, the what do you call it, the pleasure of sex causes people to commit adultery, causes people to be unfaithful, causes people to be, it causes people to do a lot of things, right? So that's the next thing on the list. The other thing is social media. I think is there's a pleasure that comes with social media, with people sharing your stuff, liking your stuff, commenting on your stuff, mentioning in real life, oh hey, I saw your post, I thought it was great. um Whatever, there's pleasure in even actually like posting the thing, right? Like when you post a picture, when you post a video, there's pleasure in making content. Like I'm enjoying this right now. I know you can't tell from my face. I just have a face that looks like I don't enjoy most things, right? Um but yeah, that one is, and you can like add things under that. That can be its own genre, because in one of the podcasts that I've done before with a guest, we talked about how social media is a big comparison game, and there's a pleasure in comparison. Like, oh, I'm better than that person, but there's also the negative side of comparison is like, oh, I'm not as good as that person. So social media definitely, the pleasure of social media can become addicting. The one that I thought of next was status, and that doesn't. It makes me. The reason I thought of it next is because a lot of people portray their status on um, on social media. You know, they want to make it seem like they have a certain status, which might be like an elite job or just an elite lifestyle or something like that. But even if the reason I think about those separately is because like even when you're not on social media, you might want to come off that you have a certain status to your neighbors or your coworkers or your friends or your family or something like that. And you knowing that they think that you have a certain status, whether you actually have it or not, that gives you a form of pleasure. And that's what you're after, the pleasure of knowing like, oh, these people think that I have it like this, right? So like all of these have to do with some kind of pleasure. The next one that I thought of was attention. I thought of status and attention because of social media, but attention is different than uh, status. Like if you're a parent, you know that sometimes your children act up just because they want attention, even if it's negative attention. But you don't even have to think of children. You do that sometimes, right? Like you've done it before when you some there's people that like attention less, there's people that like attention more. So this obviously applies to people that like attention more. But um when you were a kid or a preteen or in middle school or in high school or in college or whatever, if you wanted the attention of a certain person, even if you were getting attention for the wrong reason, you were willing to uh, do the wrong thing or give that person the wrong reason to give you attention, because the fact that that specific person was giving you attention causes you pleasure. Now there's people that want attention from anybody and everybody because they want that pleasure that comes with receiving attention. This is one that I think is big, and I started to notice actually a few years ago, but we are addicted to the pleasure that comes from experiences. We want to experience things. We want to travel. We want to see the world. When we travel to these places, we want to experience eating at a certain place. We want to experience staying at that hotel. We want to experience skydiving, bungee jumping, rock climbing, hiking, going to different countries. We want to, you know, there's a certain pleasure that comes with experiencing something that very few people experience or that other people haven't experienced yet. And there's also a pleasure that comes with telling people like, oh, hey, I went to this place, I experienced that, I experienced this, you should totally try it, whatever. And if you think about it, one that I already mentioned, social media, a lot of times we want to experience things because there's a pleasure that comes with experiencing things, but then there's also the pleasure of like, look, I posted this experience that I had, and now people can, like it and all that. I hope I'm explaining myself. There's also the the next one that I think of that kind of has to do with when I talked about sex, but also dating. That's why there's serial daters, right? There's a certain pleasure that comes with dating a person, getting to know someone. In 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 relationships, there's what's called, colloquially, right? uh, the honeymoon phase. So there's a certain pleasure that comes with that honeymoon phase when everything is new, everything is fresh, everyone's on their best behavior, everyone's flirting, everyone. And when I mean everyone, I mean the people doing the dating. And so eventually that, fizzles. Not because, for different reasons, but primarily is because the relationship matures, right? But some people get so addicted to that pleasure that comes within that first part of the relationship that they're serial daters, right? They break up with people because there's no chemistry or the spark died or whatever. They enter a new relationship, rinse and repeat. I mean, you can also apply this to friendships. There's people who like, they kind of friend hop, right? Because like I said, when you're first getting to know someone and you're first becoming friends with someone, you want that person to be your friend. You're on your best behavior. You're trying to be your funniest, whatever. It's fresh. It's new. There's certain pleasure. There's a certain way that you feel. It can be addicting. So the next one that I thought of was lying. Lying for some people comes with a certain there's people that are bad liars. There's people that are good liars. But I think there's also people that get pleasure from having the ability to deceive people. And that's how you get pathological liars. That's how you get serial liars, people who just can't help themselves and they just lie because they get a certain pleasure from from knowing that they were able to convince you of the lie. It's kind of tied to power, which is also on the list. People get addicted to the pleasure that comes with power. Sometimes these people are seen as bossy. They like to tell people what to do because that gives them a certain amount of pleasure. That's why some people are accused of being power drunk, right? When they get a little bit of power and they try to milk it, they try to squeeze all the juice out of that orange because it gives them pleasure to know that they're able to exercise power over people and or things, right? That's funny. That was 2 down on the list. But what do I got there? I can't. Oh, the one that's kind of tied to power is fame. Usually the big 3 are like power, money, fame, money, power, money, fame, power, whatever. But yeah, so fame, some people want to be famous for the sake of being famous. There's a certain pleasure that they get from knowing a bunch of people know who I am. I'm recognizable to a certain amount of the population locally, the population, just the world population. Whatever. That's why they say that some people will do anything to be famous. Now, I guess famous, I mentioned attention earlier. So I guess somebody who wants attention for the sake of the pleasure that comes from getting attention they don't necessarily want to be famous. They just want attention from whoever is around. They want to be the center of attention. I guess the difference is people who, you could, technically speaking, you could be someone that is introverted and is a homebody and just wants to stay at home and doesn't want attention from anybody, but wants to be famous. Like you want people to know who you are, know of you, but not necessarily give you attention. Maybe I could be wrong on that. Now that I'm saying it out loud, it does make sense. But I think most people would agree that the pleasure of being famous, uh, obviously, can be addicting, and people go to great lengths to be famous if they can help it. Something that I think, something else that I think uh, can be addicting is sports. I think maybe because I'm not into sports, and maybe because it seems to me that a lot of men are, but I feel like, and it's not necessarily like sports on TV, but I feel like a lot of parents, and yeah, I feel like it's mostly parent, like they're willing to, um, there's something about, they get some parents, I'm thinking this through, but it seems like parents who have kids in sports, um, they get a certain pleasure from knowing that their kid is good at that sport, and maybe they're kind of living vicariously through them, which is not unique to that. I mean, a lot of people live vicariously through other people, but it just seems like in the U.S., except for soccer, sports are a big deal. And so to be fair to the parents that have kids in sports, what do you call it? Spectator sports in the U.S. is like a multi-million, if not $1 billion industry. So there's a certain pleasure that comes from watching sports on TV, laptop, YouTube, whatever. And then recently, these guys were having an intense conversation about sports. So there's a certain pleasure that comes from that as well. So far, I think that's been my least favorite example. Um, but hey, I'm thinking about it out loud with you, my dear and beloved Danny Flo, as I dropped the mic. I didn't actually drop it. I mean, I brought it down further than what I said that I was going to do, but it's back up by my mouth and by the beard stash. Green light is on. Should be working. Um, so I thought of fitness because there's a certain pleasure that comes with fitness, and it's not a bad. I mean, in some of these cases, the pleasure that comes from the thing is not bad. Obviously, I don't agree with all of these. I just know that these are things that we can do in life, and it doesn't cost us much time, money, or effort to. Now, obviously, if you have a lot of money, it's easier for you to get. But like I said, you can be a regular guy and have a or a regular girl, and have a regular 9 to 5, and use a portion of your paycheck to get any of these things. You can get drugs, you can buy food, you can buy liquor. I don't recommend it, but you can buy sex, right? You can buy likes and followers on social media. You can buy status, like you can literally buy a check mark on your social media, but also like there's places that will rent you a luxury car, right? You can buy attention. You can spend money on experiences. You can spend money on dating. You can spend money on lying. That's all of these that you can do with relatively low money, effort, and time, is my point. But okay, so back to fitness. So there's a certain pleasure that comes with fitness, but there's also a certain pleasure that comes from the attention that you get from fitness, or the compliments that you get from being fit, or the knowledge of knowing that because you're fit, you can do something that this other person can't. There's certain pleasures that come from fitness that if you don't keep them in check, which I have to do because I'm into fitness, even though, you know, doesn't necessarily look like it. But what are you going to do? Genetics, right? That's what I'll blame it on. Anyways, work. There's a certain pleasure that comes from work for some people. Some people hate working, right? I'm actually a person that does like to work, but that's why some people are called workaholics. There's a certain pleasure that comes from being productive, from doing a job's well done, from accomplishing something, right? That we can chase that pleasure, right? And second to last, money, right? Sometimes that's why we work so hard. It's pleasurable for us to have a certain pile of money or a certain amount of money in the bank. It's pleasurable for us to look at our bank account and the numbers are a certain number, right? And then, not to mention, like I said, all the things that you can do with money, right? I feel like maybe that one is a little bit self-explanatory. The last one is, I feel like I've been thinking about this one the most, but things, man. I'm overwhelmed sometimes by the number of storage facility businesses. Someone is willing, not just someone, a lot of people in the United States are willing to spend money on a monthly basis to keep a room full of stuff. Now, sometimes you have to rent a storage facility basis in a case of emergency. Maybe you're in between places, you're in between apartments, or you're in between houses, or you got kicked out, you're going through a divorce, whatever. But I feel like maybe I'm ignorant in this area. Maybe I'm talking out of ignorance, but I feel like most people just run out of room. There's a pleasure in having stuff. There's a pleasure in buying stuff. There's a pleasure in knowing if the day comes, you can just go to your storage facility or your basement or whatever, and you could finally use that thing that you've been owning for so long that you'd never use. But man, I mean, I am a person that is trying to get rid of stuff. I don't consider myself a minimalist, but sometimes I'm overwhelmed by the stuff that I've accumulated, sometimes through my own fault. I don't know how many of my family members listen or watch my podcast, but I kind of don't like when people give me stuff out of the blue. I know they're trying to be nice, I know they're trying to help, but there's a joke by a late comedian, I think his name is like Mitch Hedberg or whatever. His jokes were like non sequitur jokes. What do you call it? A non sequitur is like when your conclusion doesn't follow from your previous statements or your previous premises. But one of his jokes, I probably butchered his name too, but sorry about that. May he rest in peace. God rest his soul. But he said something like, "Oh yeah, I hate when people hand me flyers because I feel like they're saying, here, you throw it away." That's kind of how I feel about people who give me their stuff when they're trying to help. So it's like, there's a reason you don't want it. And I know that, sometimes one man's trash is another man's treasure. But a lot of times when people give me their stuff, like, I feel pressure to say yes because I know they're trying to be nice. And because when I've said no, people get offended. Like, what do you mean you don't want it? Well, you don't want it. Why are you giving it to me? I feel like you're giving it to me because you're too lazy to just throw it away or just sell it or put it on the curb so somebody will pick it up. But like, I'm trying to get rid of my own stuff. I don't need you giving me more stuff. Anyways. But yeah, I just can't, I hope to God that I never rent a storage facility. It's just, it's overwhelming to me that people, they have so much stuff in their house that they were like, instead of getting rid of stuff, selling it, whatever, they're like, I'll just pay money to store this stuff that I seldom use. And I feel like there's a pleasure in having things. Not for me. I can't well, there's certain things that I do want in life, but thank God he gave me a certain level of patience, and that little bit of patience, I'm using that to eventually accumulate the things that I want. And in the meantime, I need to get rid of some things that I don't want and don't use and don't need. But why did I give you this long list of things that come with a certain level of pleasure? Because, I mean, haven't we tried it all at this point, right? I mean, I'm 31 and I'm not proud to say, but I think that I've pretty much tried everything on this list, except for the storage facility thing. But I do have a lot of stuff, and I don't say that proudly. And like, we're not satisfied, right? We're not satiated. If anything, a lot of times, like, the more we engage in these stuff, like, it causes damage. It almost seems like there's a certain amount that you should do, and if you go above that, then it can become an addiction. And then addiction, you do it more and more and more because you're chasing the first. You're for some reason you think that if you just do it one more time, you'll finally be satisfied, or whatever. But ultimately, these things don't seem to satisfy us. And I want you to think about it, because if all these things that we all have tried and all have experienced, and yes, do come with a certain amount of pleasure, if all these things, satisfy us, don't satisfy us, I misspoke. They don't ultimately satisfy us at the end of the day. They just bring us momentarily pleasure. I feel like it's telling us something. It's almost like we're answering a question or answering a desire with all of these wrong answers, right? It almost seems like we're never going to be satisfied unless because it almost seems like our desire is limitless. So it kind of points to there has to be something or someone that is limitless that can fulfill this. And I would say that all of these things that bring pleasure, I'll say it like that, I've personally come to the conclusion that these are all substitutes for God. Now, as I mentioned, who is the only person that is infinite and unlimited and ultimately can fulfill this. It almost seems like a bottomless hole of like, we want, you know what I'm saying? Because like, why do we keep doing that? But like I said, I don't think all of these, as a practicing Catholic, I don't think all of these things are inherently bad. Some of them I do think that we should avoid because I believe in things like sin and stuff like that. But if you don't, I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just saying, like, you've most likely you've tried all of these things, and yes, they bring you a certain amount of pleasure, but they don't ultimately satisfy you. And it's like, I feel like you should take that question more seriously. Like, why doesn't it ultimately satisfy me? Is it just that like, is it just that I'm going to be conceived, born, grow up, experience a certain amount of pleasures from here to there, and then die, and that's it? Or could it be that the reason that I'm not ultimately satisfied is because I'm not meant to be satisfied by that stuff? That maybe the good stuff on the list is supposed to point us to something higher, almost as if there's like a bridge. Because think of something like love, right? The love your parents have for you, the love your siblings have for you, the love your extended family has for you, the love a friend has for you, right? There's a certain pleasure that comes from receiving love and from giving love. But should that be the end? Or is that the end? Or is it pointing to something higher? That's all I'm trying to get you to think of. And I'm trying to get you to revisit the question again and again. Not so that you'll ultimately agree with me or agree with every single person that believes in God, or agrees with all the theists out there, or agrees with the Catholic Church, or agrees with Christianity, or whatever. But you have to, I think you have to come to a point where you are self-satisfied with the amount of reflection and thought that you've put into it, that you didn't like just put the minimal effort, right? Especially because some of you that are listening or watching this might completely disagree with me and say, like, yeah, I've experienced some of these pleasures, but I don't think that they can become addictive. I think it's very few people that become addictive, and I don't think they're pointing to anything higher. But some of you might agree with me, like, hey, yeah, I have tried all of these things and I'm still left wanting, right? So if you're in that field area, then you're gonna want to revisit and reflect and think about it deeply, not just today, but a lot, because you're gonna want to be, like I said, self-satisfied with the amount of effort and thought that you put into it, and not just one of the stereotypes about Catholics is that we're just Catholic because that's the way that we were raised. Well, that's just a different way of saying that you're too lazy to think about it yourself, and stuff like that. So the same applies to something like this. Well, don't just accept what I say or what other people say. Just think about it, and think about it for a long time. I mean, if anything, we can agree that we're, as humans, we have the ability to think, so that we should exercise it, right? So think about it today, think about it tomorrow, think about it for a week, a month, think about it for a year, think about it for 10 years, and get to the point where you're like, yes, I think that the pleasures of this life are meant to point us to something higher, something that's like something that actually is fulfilling, aka God. Or no, that's all I'm trying to do. Thank you for watching and or listening. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcast, wherever you're listening. Share the episode. Let me know what you think, either in the YouTube comments. The link to send me a voice message is in the linktree. Make sure you leave a review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify. Turn notifications on. YouTube has that feature for sure. I'm not sure if... Yeah, Spotify has that feature. I don't know about Apple Podcast. I might have said this already, but make sure you share the episode. Maybe next time that we see each other, my beard will be back. But until then, you guys know, or you should know, even though I'm not reading him as much as I should, I'm a Sheenist. I would say probably my favorite philosopher is Fulton Sheen. I'm not scared to say that, but he had a show called Your Life is Worth Living, and I would just like to remind you, as Venerable Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen said, your life is worth living. Love you, my guys and my girls. Bye.